Good morning on this Sunday, August 30th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Some surprise appearances from Georgians at the Republican National Convention. Also, Governor Kemp gets good national press over his handling of Georgia's economy. And should those who were arrested during the protest on the streets of Atlanta have their charges dropped? Barron, Phil, Janelle, and Kathy are all here joining us from their homes. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Two Georgians took center stage on the opening night of the Republican National Convention, both making bold statements about the issue of race and their support for President Donald Trump.
I take it as a personal insult that people would think I've had a 37-year friendship with the racists. People who think that don't know what they're talking about. Growing up in the Deep South, I've seen racism up close. I know what it is, and it isn't Donald Trump.
But I'm here to tell you that black voices are becoming more woke and louder than ever.
Janelle, we'll start with you this week. Those are some extremely strong words. This week we saw more African Americans and minorities speak at the RNC than in years past. But can Donald Trump attract more minority voters in Georgia? And why should they vote for him?
So great question. You know what? I actually really enjoyed the convention. What I saw was that we are not dealing with blind devotion, which is what I feel we are constantly being labeled as, that we are just supporting President Trump for no reason at all. But what you saw is people sharing their personal stories. You know, for a number of years, we have been told that the Republican Party doesn't reach out to minorities. For a number of years, we've been told there's been no minority engagement. Well, that's not true. There's been direct minority engagement, and you're seeing the results of it. You're seeing the results of African Americans who are not afraid to share what they're going through and share their personal stories. I thought it was awesome. I really respected it. I love the fact that they didn't get up there and just kind of talk about just the political side of it, but they talked about personal relationship, which is what really matters.
Farron, over to you. You're a big UGA fan. What did you think of Herschel's message? Because so many Democrats have labeled President Trump as a racist.
You know, I grew up being a tremendous fan of Herschel Walkers. I mean, I'm still a fan of him as an athlete. Unfortunately, I just blatantly disagree with him as far as his support of President Trump. What I will say about Herschel is that for those of us that have known him for a while, he's never really aligned himself with the Democratic Party. And so let's, for our viewers, know that as a Democrat, I wasn't shocked to see Herschel Walkers speaking at a Republican convention, because I think he's definitely aligned himself over the years with the Republican Party. I will say this about Herschel, again, as I'm disappointed as in the individual, I do still support him as an athlete and what his contributions were to the University of Georgia. But I will say that unlike Vernon Jones, at least Herschel was able to actually talk about his friendship with Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump even knows who Vernon Jones is. I would suspect that he hadn't had many conversations with him. And so that was, to me, the biggest difference. But ultimately, Herschel is one man. He's one black man. He doesn't speak for the entire black community. But I do think that while I'm disappointed with his support, I still support him as a former UGA Heisman Trophy winner.
Phil, weigh in here. What do you think about, we saw so many minorities and so many African Americans prominently on stage at this week's convention?
Well, I think it was very good. It was a great array of speakers that had their own personal stories from all walks of life. And I think a lot of people get tired of the same old political speech from elected officials. So that was a refreshing thing to see at the Republican convention, and quite a contrast to the Democrats. You know, you talk about the two Georgians, Vernon Jones, the state representative, and of course Herschel Walker. I think whether you like Vernon Jones or not, he had a compelling message. And a lot of Democrats in Georgia and elsewhere are wrestling with this. Do I like where my party is going with big government controls over our lives, also known as socialism? Or do I still appreciate the free enterprise system and private enterprise and the profit motive that is making this country great and is a big part of the American dream? And I think Vernon Jones emphasized that. We don't want socialism. And I think that Herschel Walker, that was also a very compelling speech. You look at last week's Democratic convention, and it was gloom and doom, and this is an irredeemable irredeemable country is what the hard left is selling. And I think that Herschel said, there's change, there's progress, there could be redemption here. It was, I think, contrasting. The Republicans were optimistic and the Democrats were pessimistic at their convention.
Kathy, let's follow up on that. We, as expected, heard a lot about law and order. How do you think that resonates here in Georgia with Georgia voters? I mean, Democrats also want law and order, but it seems like Republicans are really holding on to that message.
Well, the message is going to change depending on kind of what the headlines are. And so there was a confluence of, an unfortunate shooting. I was going to say murder, but Jacob Blake is paralyzed, during the convention. And so I think that played to that. But, to me, this is sort of the dog whistle of Willie Horton, right? If you want to get people alarmed about the state of the country, you sort of focus on isolated incidents. What we're still not seeing is, an agenda, right? This convention was not one that laid out a platform. We can only think what happened in the last 4 years is sort of a repeat of what the president will do in the next 4 years if reelected. And I couldn't even tell you what the roadmap for that was other than reacting to situations as they occur. So, I expect that message will change. And if it doesn't change, it means it's resonating. But to me, it's just a dog whistle for his base.
Theron, weigh in on that, because a lot of Georgia voters paying attention here. Republicans are painting themselves as the party of law and order. How do Democrats, how in particularly Joe Biden, how does he kind of bring those voters in to say, hey, so are we, and here's my plan?
But Laura, we first got to recognize that this is Trump America. This is Trump's America. This violence that we're seeing, this unrest, these murders, these shootings, these people vandalizing buildings. This is under the Trump leadership. And so to pass the buck and to say that this is something that Joe Biden needs to fix, no, Mr. President, you need to fix this, because we know that based on his rhetoric, based on some of the things that he's tweeted out, his embracement of white supremacy groups, even before we got to what we're seeing going on right now, had a very big deal to do with some of the protesting that we're seeing, because we're actually protesting against this America that he's created. What I saw at the Republican convention was just no sense of ownership. There was no recognition of the shooting with Jacob Blake. And I'm so glad you said his name, Kathy. Even though it's not on our topic list, we're going to talk about Jacob Blake, because he's another unarmed black man who was shot by a police officer. The second thing is that there was just no condolences to the two people who were murdered by a armed teenager who, by the way, was not arrested, who walked down the street right past police officers with a long rifle. And I would say this, I think it's something that Kathy has said, Lori, on this show, and I want to back her up. We've got to change the state law in Georgia with open carry. We are one incident away in Georgia for seeing what happened this week happening in Georgia. We've got to change the open carry law. But again, it's no responsibility from Trump. He's not taking any ownership of this mess that he's caused. And that's why I believe that the Biden-Harris tickets are going to win, and we're going to change what's going on in America right now.
Janelle, weigh in here, because, we saw some of that violence play out right here in the streets of Atlanta. Is President Trump to blame? Is this Trump's America, just as Theron said?
I think that is absolutely ridiculous. To say this is Trump's America when everyone out there in the street is saying that they're anti-Trump makes no sense. The people out there are Democrats. There is no Republicans that are out there, looting businesses and tearing down businesses, spray painting all over the walls, screaming at people. We had people yelling at and trying to attack Rand Paul, and Rand Paul is leading legislation against the no-knock policy as it relates to issuing warrants. So it's a lack of education. It's just people being angry and mad. And you want to talk about mentioning people who were hurt or killed or shot during these riots? Well, what about Horace Lorenzo Anderson, who was killed in the chop zone in Seattle, and we still don't know who killed him? I mean, what about that? There was no mention of him. There was no mention of the rioting, period, during the DNC. While we're talking about why we're not mentioning this, there was nothing that was said about any of this. And then when you talk about the open carry laws, well, it's funny to me that the open carry law was fine when it came to, having armed guards standing in front of a burned down Wendy's and until an 8-year-old was shot. So it's just really interesting to me how Democrats try to just paint this picture that this is all Trump's fault. This is not all Trump's fault. How is it all Trump's fault? Simply because he's the president? Here's the thing. He's spoken out against it. He's the only one that's speaking out against it. Democrats have nothing to say about any of this.
I got to give Theron a couple seconds here.
Janelle, you just said it. He is the president of the United States of America. And yes, when you look at a lot of the things that are going on, I think it's a little disingenuous for you to say that every single protester, peaceful or not, are Democrats. And also there's been this characterization that all of them are rioters. That is disingenuous. Now, you do have a few people, like the white teenager who shot these unarmed protesters. Those are the bad guys. But the majority of people who are protesting to end police brutality, to end murders in this country, are people who want to go out there peacefully and protect them. And the last thing I'll say is this. Again,
when the
prove my
president
point.
wants
There's
to send in
no
law and
ownership
order,
from
you
this
say
administration.
no.
Okay, don't speak over
It's like, so right, we want the president to do it, and we want the president to step in and do something, and then when he does step in and do something, you tell him to remove himself out. I don't know what exactly.
You
can't blame him.
The country together.
Theron, you can't blame him.
Okay,
you
we'll
can't blame him for the actions
this
of
is
Democrats.
Trump's America.
All right, we'll continue the debate another day because we're going to move on. I know this is a very heated topic, and we will definitely be discussing it over the next few months. But right now, coming up, Governor Brian Kemp gets praise from the Wall Street Journal for his handling of Georgia's economy during the coronavirus pandemic.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
He has taken his share of harsh criticisms and hits for opening up the state too soon during the coronavirus pandemic. This week, Governor Kemp received praise from the Wall Street Journal for his handling of the economy. Phil, your thoughts?
Well, I think it was an editorial that needed to be written. You would never see that in the, for example, the left-wing Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And basically what the editorial in the Wall Street Journal said was that it was a great balancing approach, following health protocols and CDC guidelines while not destroying a state's economy like some of these Democrat governors have done, either through stupidity or for political reasons. And so I think it was merited praise, and I also am very pleased that last Sunday, Governor Kemp, called out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for its bias, continued bias, slanted headlines, stories, hysterical headlines about deaths that are the other side of the story isn't presented. The AJC, as I said last week, is really abandoning basic journalism tenets, and I hope they can get back to some sort of objectivity, especially with regard to the governor and the fact that the curve is going down with regard to hospitalizations and cases, and to give the other side of the story. The governor's office is giving it, but all too many media outlets aren't.
Kathy, weigh in. I assume that you will disagree with Phil's comments and his take, the Wall Street Journal's take on the economy in Georgia.
Yeah, and honestly, the AJC is not a left-wing newspaper. I don't refer to the Wall Street Journal as a right-wing newspaper, and I certainly could do so. I think that it's important to realize that, the Wall Street Journal has a point of view in support of business and thinks that this is a good idea. But let me remind you, in the last couple weeks, 2 rural hospitals have closed. There's more on the way. We have people who are filing unemployment and not being able to get the support. The restaurant industry is in tatters. We've got schools opening and closing as quickly as possible because of COVID. He's not following health guidelines, and the CDC's guidelines can't be trusted anymore because they're politically manipulated. So if your only barometer is some kind of barometer about your ability to repay your loans and state debt, that's one barometer. But then you've got all of these other things that are piling up on the side that also have a cost to our society, and I disagree.
Theron, I want to move on because while we're talking about the economy, the governor has also said the state doesn't need another federal bailout, rather just flexibility on how to spend the first round of money. Do you agree with that?
I got to trust that the governor knows what he's talking about. I trust that he has looked at his rainy day funds. He's looked at his budget projections. He's forecast years from now to make that bold decision. I will say this. I think that you don't turn down federal assistance when you have it available to you. And that's the reason why you see a lot of states actually not only accepting this federal assistance, but they're requesting it. So I just would hope that a year or two from now, we're not on this show talking about, wow, we really wish Governor Kemp would have taken that federal assistance. But ultimately, that is a good news for us as taxpayers and as who support rebuilding this economy during this deadly pandemic, that he feels that comfortable at this moment that he is going to turn down that federal assistance. I just ultimately hope it's the right decision.
Yeah, weigh in on that because, we've seen 2 rural hospitals, as Kathy had mentioned, closing. We know that educators are stretched thin because of all of the preparation work that they've been doing because of the pandemic. Your thoughts on this economy and really the state budget?
Yeah, so I think federal dollars that come with restrictions it's not federal dollars that we necessarily need, because if it's not going towards areas that are impacted, then it's just sitting in a bank account. So I do think that releasing the restrictions is key to this, because then we can put money into healthcare, we can put money into education, which are the 2 hardest hit areas during this pandemic. So I don't think we should just accept money simply because it's coming here, because it doesn't just come, it doesn't just hit the bank account. It comes with a level of restrictions that may not be conducive for this state and may not be conducive for what we need right now. So I do trust I do trust the governor as well, and I do think that he's going to make the best decision possible.
Okay, everyone, thank you. We'll leave it there. Coming up, some are calling for the charges to be dropped against hundreds of people arrested during the protests on the streets of Atlanta. We'll discuss straight ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The AJC is reporting that dozens of attorneys, activists, and clergy are calling for Atlanta leaders to drop the charges against 600 people arrested during this summer's protests on the streets. Theron, we'll start with you on this. I want to play devil's advocate. If that were to happen, what kind of message would that send when it comes to the future protests if they turn violent? And why have a curfew if you're not going to enforce the rules?
Well, the mayor did enforce the curfew. That's why you had arrests. So let's make sure we make that point. I think the challenge for the Bottoms administration and Chief Bryan is to make sure that they are able to communicate to the public that if you were peacefully protesting, but then you decided to violate a city or state law and were arrested, then that's a whole different category. But if you were arrested for breaking the curfew and you were peacefully protesting, then I think that's the balance that the police department and the mayor's office have got to make sure they communicate to the public, because that's not a quote unquote violent offense. But let's be clear, if there were people that actually got arrested that committed crimes, I think what these leaders are saying is that in this climate that we're in right now and where we're trying to move forward as a welcoming city, they have the very right to sort of request that these charges be dropped. I think ultimately the mayor is going to have to continue to talk to those leaders, continue to talk to the protesters, and get advice from the police department on what's best to move forward.
Phil, what do you think? I mean, should they be prosecuted for violating a curfew?
Well, absolutely. Theron didn't make anything clear at all. In fact, many of these people committed felonies. Even Mayor Bottoms herself said, look, you've been peacefully protesting for the most part all day. Now is the time to go home. And the point of the curfew was to stop the violent rioting and looting that was going on. And so I think that this is not Donald Trump's America. It's actually Bottoms' Atlanta and liberal America. This is why people want law and order. If you're having a curfew the next time, is it going to be obeyed in Atlanta or these other big cities? These Democrat mayors have got to be enforcing the law and stop being permissive, back up their police officers. I talk to police officers a lot in Atlanta, and just last Tuesday there was a riot and an actual attack on a police substation that was very underreported, and some of the officers said, gee, are we going to get in trouble defending our own substation? That's a sad commentary in Atlanta.
All right, we'll switch gears. Georgia's state election board is referring Fulton County's issues with absentee ballots in the June primary over to the state attorney general to decide if any laws were broken. 254 complaints from voters who said they never received the requested absentee ballots. Kathy, what do you think about this move?
Well, that's going to get sorted out as it gets sorted out. I think what's important is that we stay very, very focused on November 3rd and how we're going to have every single voter in Georgia have equal and safe access to the polls. And, that's our biggest challenge right now. Fulton County, has the biggest number of voters, and they got absolutely stomped on in the primary with COVID and illnesses and a death in their office. It's not an excuse that we have new technology and old technology that's not talking to each other and other things. And I'm hopeful that what will happen is that the Secretary of State's office will use the office as they're supposed to use it to make sure that every county is able to meet the challenge and not make the county spend time right this minute, rehashing through, charges, what happened. What we really need right now is for that analysis to help us on how we're going to move forward.
Well, if the state of Georgia is not going to send out applications for absentee ballots for the November election, then nonprofits are stepping in. Janelle, isn't this a good idea if it gets more voters to cast ballots?
Oh, I mean, anything that causes, more voters to vote is a great thing. However, I think that what we're seeing now is just they're switching up the process in the middle of the game, and that's where the problem comes in. We have a lot of people, as I was told, you have too many chefs in the kitchen, and a lot of people that's trying to help and trying to be a part of this process. But I think we need to make sure that we take care of home first. We got to look at these county elections and election teams and election boards and make sure that they are well trained, that they're ready to be there on election day. It doesn't look like we're going to be voting by mail, which is a good thing. So I'm so happy that we'll be able to vote in person. And I think that's what we need to focus on, is just keeping the process the way it is. Sending out a bunch of absentee ballots and ballot requests is kind of confusing people, especially those who don't know what's going to happen, whether we're going in or we're voting by mail. So Theron, I think we should keep it as normal as possible.
Theron, weigh in. Will this confuse people, like Janelle said?
No, it's really simple. I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, why was it good enough to send out absentee ballot applications in May for the primary election, and why is it not good enough now? We also got to point to the fact that a lot of people never received their absentee ballot application. And so the confusing part is not necessarily that voters don't know how to vote. It's really simple. Either you can go to your polling place on election day, or you can early vote at a identified location, or the Secretary of State of Georgia should send you the application so you can have the choice to vote absentee. I think that anytime you start making it harder and bringing in more restrictions for citizens to vote is where you open yourself up for more and more lawsuits. And so at the end of the day, I just disagree. I think that people who want to vote absentee should be able to vote absentee, and people who want to go vote early, they should be able to vote early. We should have as many locations as we possibly can. Okay. And on election day, we need to anticipate a large turnout and make sure that we have done everything we need to do to make sure that these elections are safe, they're secure, and that people can trust their vote.
We'll wrap it there. Thanks, guys. And coming up, we'll have winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Not much time for winners and losers. We'll go to Janelle.
Okay, my winner this week is my neighbors, David and Susan Paul. They sent me the sweetest note and the cutest elephant face mask. Thank you so much. During this time of unrest, I'm so grateful to have neighbors that are kind.
All right, over to Theron.
Yeah, I want to make the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Hunters Agency for working in a collective manner to make sure that they recently conducted the Operation Not Forgotten, and they rescued over 36 children in North and Middle Georgia for sex trafficking. I know that's something that First Lady Marty Kemp was very passionate about, and also Tyler Perry. So definitely want to recognize that U.S. Marshals unit.
That was on my list there, and thank you. And we will go over to Phil.
Well, I'm going to have to keep beating up on the AJC as my loser. Wednesday morning's print edition this last week didn't mention that armed militants attacked a police substation. The stupid headline was, "Police break up crowd after damage reported near Woodruff Park." Come on. Also, a winner, Randall Rollins, a billionaire, one of the world's richest men, passed away at 88, a great philanthropist.
All right, Kathy, we have about 30 seconds.
The city of Atlanta for purchasing 200 acres. That's the Lake Charlotte Nature Preserve in southeast Atlanta. It's really a great addition to our park system using the Tree Recompense Fund. And the Stone Mountain Action Coalition that's working with folks at Stone Mountain to try to make the park a place of healing and reconciliation and natural beauty that everyone can enjoy. And I look forward to their work.
All right, well, I've got some time, so I'm going to mention the U.S. Census. It was on the list to discuss. It's still going on until the end of September. Georgia's numbers are extremely low, and this means a lack of federal money coming into the state that we desperately need. So everybody fill out your census forms, please, and spread the word. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.